Hello, my name is Apple, and this is AppleKnows channel. Get ready, because today I'm about to share with you some jaw-dropping aviation facts that sound almost impossible to believe, but every single one of them is true. Let's dive straight into the skies, where reality sometimes feels stranger than fiction. Did you know that the wings of a Boeing 747 are so massive and flexible that during flight they can bend more than 7 meters without breaking? Imagine watching that giant machine flex its wings like a bird. It looks terrifying, but that flexibility is exactly what keeps the aircraft safe from snapping under pressure. Engineers actually designed them to move like that, otherwise turbulence would destroy them. And here's something that will blow your mind: helicopters, despite their incredible maneuverability, are among the most mechanically complex flying machines humans have ever built. A helicopter's rotor system has thousands of moving parts, each working in perfect synchronization. In fact, when the first Sikorsky helicopters were developed, some engineers joked that it was a miracle they could even fly at all, because of how many things had to work perfectly at once. Yet today, helicopters can perform feats no plane could dream of, like hovering motionless in the air or flying backward. But here's a detail about planes that is both chilling and fascinating. Commercial pilots almost never fly the aircraft manually for the majority of the flight. In fact, autopilot handles around 90% of long-haul flights. Pilots mainly control takeoff and landing, while the rest of the time, the plane is managed by systems so advanced they can calculate fuel, altitude, and even the exact curve of the Earth's surface. Still, no autopilot can replace human instinct in a crisis, and history has proven that the sharp skills of pilots have saved countless lives when technology failed. Let's talk about safety, because here comes the shocker. Statistically, flying is about 19 times safer than traveling by car. Yet the human brain still fears flying more, because we feel powerless inside a sealed cabin thousands of meters above the ground. What most people don't realize is that modern jet engines are so reliable, they can keep flying for hours even if one completely shuts down. A twin-engine jet, like the Airbus A350 or Boeing 777, can safely cross oceans with just a single engine running, thanks to international ETOPS regulations, extended range twin-engine operational performance standards. And helicopters? They hold secrets too. Many believe that if the engine of a helicopter fails, it will simply drop like a stone. But here's the twist: helicopters can perform something called autorotation, using the air rushing through the blades to keep them spinning and allow a controlled landing without engine power. It's not just a theory. This maneuver has saved pilots and passengers in real emergencies, proving that helicopters are not as helpless as they might seem. Now let's go even further. Do you know that one of the largest planes in the world, the Antonov An-225 Mriya, was so big that it could carry not only military tanks but also other airplanes strapped on its back? With a wingspan longer than a football field, it was the king of the skies until its destruction in 2022. Its sheer size stunned even the most experienced pilots. It was like watching a flying city lift into the air. Another fact that always shocks people is that a commercial jet at cruising altitude is flying through air that is almost as thin and hostile as what astronauts face in space. At 10,000 meters up, the temperature outside can reach minus 60 degrees Celsius, and the air is so thin you'd lose consciousness in seconds without pressurization. In a sense, every time you board a plane, you're entering an artificial environment that allows humans to survive in conditions where nature never intended us to be. But here's the detail that really makes people pause: the black box on an airplane isn't actually black, it's bright orange, designed that way so it can be found more easily after a crash. And these recorders are nearly indestructible, able to survive extreme pressure, flames, and deep-sea conditions. They hold the final secrets of a flight, even when everything else is lost. And one more twist before I hand you the next fact: some military helicopters are designed with such stealth technology that they can be almost invisible to radar. In fact, a secret stealth helicopter was used during the 2011 raid on Osama bin Laden, and very few details about it are known to this day. The fact that helicopters with that kind of ghost-like technology exist proves that what we know about aviation is just the tip of the iceberg. Trust me, you're about to hear things that most people never imagine when they step into a plane or watch a helicopter rise into the sky. Here's something that feels almost unreal: modern jet engines are so powerful that a single one can produce more thrust than all 4 engines combined on some early airliners of the 1950s. For example, one engine of a Boeing 777 generates more power than the rocket that launched the first American astronauts into space. It's staggering to think that the smooth hum you hear inside the cabin comes from machinery strong enough to move skyscraper-sized aircraft across oceans. And let's talk about turbulence, the one thing passengers fear the most. Here's the truth: turbulence almost never brings a plane down. Planes are tested against forces far greater than any turbulence could ever produce. Boeing engineers once tested a wing until it bent nearly 90 degrees upward before braking. In real flight, turbulence is uncomfortable, sure, but it's nowhere near powerful enough to tear a plane apart. What really causes injuries is when people ignore the seatbelt sign, because the cabin might shake so hard that you can literally be thrown against the ceiling. Now, helicopters are hiding a shocking fact too. During the Vietnam War, helicopters like the Huey became icons of survival and mobility, but they also faced unbelievable risks. Studies showed that some combat helicopters had life expectancies of less than 3 weeks in active missions. Pilots often joked that they were flying airborne targets because the machines were loud, slow compared to jets, and constantly vulnerable. Yet despite that, helicopters became essential lifelines, rescuing soldiers from jungles where no plane could ever land. Here's a chilling but true detail about passenger planes: the oxygen masks that drop in emergencies only provide about 12 to 20 minutes of oxygen. That shocks most people. But that's not because airlines expect the crisis to be over in 20 minutes, it's because that's all the time needed for the pilots to bring the aircraft down to a safe altitude where you can breathe normally again. The system is designed with cold, efficient logic, but it works. And this one is almost unbelievable. In 1983, a Canadian flight nicknamed the Gimli glider ran completely out of fuel mid-flight due to a metric conversion error. The pilots had no engines, no thrust, nothing but gravity. And yet, by gliding like a massive powerless bird, they managed to land the Boeing 767 on an abandoned airstrip without a single fatality. It was one of the greatest demonstrations of pilot skill in aviation history, proving that sometimes human instinct outperforms every piece of technology. Here's another fact that never fails to surprise. Airplane toilets don't flush with water the way home toilets do. Instead, they use powerful vacuum suction. That's why you hear that strange roaring sound. And yes, it's true, nothing is released into the sky. Waste is stored in sealed tanks that get emptied after landing. But back in the early days of aviation, before regulations became strict, there were rare cases where frozen chunks of waste, nicknamed blue ice, broke off planes and fell to the ground. Imagine that shock if it landed in your backyard. And speaking of shocks, consider this: Concorde, the legendary supersonic jet, could cross the Atlantic in just about 3.5 hours, faster than the rotation of the Earth's surface. That meant passengers leaving London in the morning could arrive in New York earlier than the time they had departed, essentially arriving before they left, thanks to time zone differences. For travelers, it felt like time travel was real. Now let's turn back to helicopters for a moment. Did you know that the fastest helicopter in the world, the Eurocopter X-3, once reached speeds of nearly 470 kilometers per hour? That's faster than many small airplanes. Helicopters are not just slow, hovering machines, they're capable of insane speed when technology pushes the limits. And finally for this round, here's a fact that rattles even frequent flyers: at cruising altitude, the humidity inside a plane cabin can be lower than that of the Sahara Desert. That's why passengers often feel dehydrated, tired, or with dry eyes and skin. You're basically sitting in one of the driest artificial climates on Earth without realizing it. Many commercial airliners are built with secret rest compartments hidden above or below the passenger cabin. These aren't for passengers, they're for the crew. On long-haul flights, pilots and flight attendants need to sleep, and airlines install hidden bunk beds in places you'd never notice. To access them, crew often open a discreet door that looks like a normal panel, then climb a narrow staircase leading to a quiet, windowless sleeping area. Most passengers have no idea that while they're watching a movie, their pilots might be resting just above their heads. And then there's the black shadow of history. Did you know that the first helicopters used in World War II were so experimental that some soldiers refused to fly in them? The early German Fokker Achilles Fa-223 was one of the very first operational helicopters, and while it could do things no plane could, it was so fragile and unstable that pilots described every flight as gambling with their lives. Yet these shaky machines opened the door to the helicopter technology we rely on today. Now here's a fact that unsettles almost everyone who hears it. If an airplane window were to suddenly break at cruising altitude, the pressure difference would cause explosive decompression in seconds. Loose objects, even people not strapped in, could be sucked out. This is why windows are built with layers of glass like acrylic, and why you'll notice a tiny hole at the bottom of each airplane window. It's there to equalize pressure between the panes, preventing cracks from spreading. That tiny hole is the silent hero keeping your window from bursting mid-flight. Let's move to something you probably never considered. When pilots talk to air traffic control, they use English no matter where in the world they are. From Brazil to Japan to Russia, the official language of aviation is English. This global standard was created after accidents in the mid-20th century were linked to miscommunication between pilots and controllers. Now, even if the pilot's native language is French or Chinese, they must use English to avoid dangerous misunderstandings. And helicopters? Here's a detail that will shock you. Some modern attack helicopters, like the AH-64 Apache, are so advanced that their pilots can control weapons just by looking at a target. The helmet they wear is connected to the helicopter's systems, meaning if the pilot turns his head, the gun mounted under the helicopter turns with it. It's as if the machine and human brain are fused into one, a terrifying example of man and machine becoming a single weapon. Now let's talk about something almost everyone wonders: could a passenger with no flight experience land a plane in an emergency? The reality is, surprisingly, yes, with help. Modern airliners are so automated that with guidance from air traffic control, a determined and calm passenger could land one safely using autopilot systems. In fact, simulators have proven it's possible. It wouldn't be smooth, but it wouldn't necessarily end in disaster either. Still, in reality, the shock and panic in such a moment would make it incredibly rare for someone to succeed. Here's a darker truth: lightning strikes planes far more often than people think. In fact, commercial jets are hit by lightning on average once per year. But they're designed for it. The electricity flows through the outer skin and exits harmlessly, usually without passengers even noticing. Engineers build planes to take the full force of a thunderstorm without failing, which is why lightning hasn't caused a major crash in decades. Still, the thought that the plane you're sitting in might be hit by a bolt of lightning tonight is enough to raise goosebumps. And here's something most people never realize: planes don't fly in perfectly straight lines across the globe. If you've seen flight paths on a map, you'll notice they look curved. That's because they follow what's called a Great Circle route, the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere. It's why flights between North America and Asia often cross over the Arctic Circle. In other words, sometimes you're much closer to the North Pole than you'd ever expect, even if your ticket says you're going somewhere tropical. Finally, for now, let me leave you with this: in extreme emergencies, passenger planes are capable of ditching on water, and they're designed to float for a period of time. The most famous example is U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson, where Captain Chesley Sullenberger glided a powerless Airbus A320 into the Hudson River after hitting a flock of geese. Not a single life was lost, proving that even in the most hopeless situation, engineering and human instinct can create miracles in the sky. Commercial planes are designed so that their tires never burst on landing, even when touching down at more than 250 kilometers per hour. The tires can withstand weights of up to 38 tons each and are inflated to pressures 6 times higher than those in a car tire. Engineers even tested them by slamming them down thousands of times in controlled trials. A plane's landing gear is one of the toughest mechanical systems ever built, strong enough to hit the runway again and again without failure. Now, consider this chilling fact. During long-haul flights, the cockpit windows sometimes develop thin cracks. Yes, cracks. But don't panic, they're built with multiple reinforced layers, and one layer cracking doesn't mean failure. Pilots have reported flying safely for hours with cracked cockpit windows while maintenance was prepared at the next destination. Still, the thought of sitting behind a sheet of glass that has fractured at 10,000 meters is the kind of detail passengers never want to imagine. And here's something fascinating: the air inside a plane is actually recirculated. About 50% of the air in the cabin is filtered through HEPA filters, the same type used in hospitals, while the rest is fresh air drawn from outside, heated and compressed by the engines. This means the cabin air is among the cleanest in any public environment. Ironically, you're often breathing safer air on a plane than you are in most offices or shopping centers. Helicopters, on the other hand, reveal something just as mind-bending. Did you know that some helicopters are built to keep flying even if the tail rotor, the part that keeps them from spinning uncontrollably, gets destroyed? They do this by adjusting the main rotor and using aerodynamic tricks like forward speed to stabilize themselves. Pilots train for this nightmare scenario, and though terrifying, it's possible to land safely without the very piece of the machine that keeps it balanced. Now let's jump to a fact that feels like science fiction. There is a Boeing 787 Dreamliner feature most passengers never notice. Its windows are the largest of any airliner, and they don't use traditional pull-down shades. Instead, they use electrochromic technology, glass that darkens at the push of a button by changing the tint electronically. This means the crew can dim all windows at once, turning day into night inside the cabin with a single command. Passengers sometimes try to fight it by pressing the button again and again, but the system always wins. The plane decides when you can see outside. Here's one that unsettles people every time they hear it. Pilots flying long routes over the oceans often plan their course along invisible highways called ETOPS corridors. But what this really means is that at times, your plane is more than 3 hours away from the nearest airport in case of emergency. 3 hours, with nothing but ocean below. That's why ETOPS certification is so strict. It's proof that a jet can fly for hours on a single engine without putting lives at risk. But for passengers, that fact can be hard to swallow. And lightning isn't the only invisible danger. Did you know volcanic ash is a deadly threat to planes? When a jet flies through an ash cloud, the particles can melt inside the engines and solidify again, shutting them down completely. In 1982, a British Airways Boeing 747 lost all 4 engines after flying into volcanic ash near Indonesia. The plane glided in total silence for several minutes before the crew managed to restart the engines and save everyone on board. It remains one of the most terrifying stories in aviation history, all because of something as natural as a volcano. Now here's something almost unbelievable about helicopters. In 2005, a Eurocopter EC-135 in the UK had a collision with power lines at night. Instead of crashing, the helicopter's rotor blades sliced clean through the cables, and it landed safely. The strength and resilience of rotor systems can be shocking. They're designed to handle forces that would destroy most machines. And let's close this round with a psychological shock. Pilots are required to eat different meals than their co-pilot. Yes, on every flight. The reason? To reduce the risk of both pilots being incapacitated by food poisoning from the same dish. That means if the captain has chicken, the first officer will have beef, or vice versa. It's one of those small, invisible rules that keep aviation among the safest industries in the world. Commercial planes carry far less fuel than people assume. They don't fill the tanks completely, because fuel itself is heavy and expensive to carry. Instead, flights calculate fuel down to a precise formula, enough for the trip, plus reserves for diversions and emergencies. That's why sometimes you'll hear about planes making emergency landings simply because they don't have enough fuel to circle around too long. They're built on razor-sharp planning, not on endless backup. And then there's the fact about engine power that almost sounds like a dare. A modern jet engine on full thrust can suck in air at such speed that if a person were standing too close on the tarmac, they could be pulled in instantly. This is why airports have strict safety zones around engines, especially during taxi and takeoff. The engines are so powerful that they can blast vehicles, baggage carts, or even other equipment across the ramp if they're too close behind. Helicopters have their own hidden dangers. One of the most shocking is the phenomenon known as vortex ring state. It's when a helicopter descends too quickly and falls into its own downward air column, losing lift completely. The helicopter begins to drop like a stone, even though the rotors are spinning at full power. It's a deadly trap pilots are trained to avoid, and escaping it requires precise skill. This is one reason helicopter flying is considered much more demanding than airplane piloting. Now let's talk about what happens in the cockpit during flights you think are routine. Pilots are constantly battling fatigue. On ultra-long-haul flights, they may legally take controlled naps while the other pilot monitors the plane. Studies have revealed that up to half of long-haul pilots admitted to falling asleep unintentionally at some point in their career. And yes, there are reports where both pilots woke up to find the plane still on autopilot, silently cruising without human eyes watching. Here's another detail most travelers miss. On many planes, the floor near the doors is slightly higher. Why? Because hidden under there are inflatable emergency slides. These slides deploy in seconds, capable of carrying the weight of dozens of people rushing down at once. They're coated in special materials so they won't tear, and they can even float if the plane lands on water. What's more shocking is that flight attendants are trained to deploy them in less than 10 seconds, because every second counts in an evacuation. Now for helicopters again, did you know some are so quiet that they can sneak up on you before you hear them? Special forces use modified helicopters with quiet rotor technology, which reduces noise to a fraction of normal. In some cases, witnesses on the ground only realized a helicopter was overhead when it was already right above them. Silence, in aviation, can be as powerful as speed. And here's a fact that unsettles frequent flyers: the cabin lights dimmed during takeoff and landing? It's not about passenger comfort, it's about survival. The dimming is designed to prepare your eyes in case of an emergency evacuation in darkness. By keeping your vision adjusted to low light, you'll be able to see better outside if something goes wrong. The same reason applies to window shades being open, so crew can immediately spot fires, debris, or hazards outside before opening an exit. But let's go even deeper. Did you know that some planes have had incidents where cargo, not passengers, nearly brought them down? In 1997, a cargo of chemical oxygen generators caught fire on a ValueJet flight in Florida. The blaze consumed the plane before it could land. That disaster changed regulations forever about what can be loaded into aircraft cargo holds. It's a dark reminder that what's beneath your feet in the belly of the plane can sometimes be as dangerous as what happens in the cabin. Finally, here's a fact that shows just how incredible human engineering can be. In 1989, United Airlines Flight 232 lost all hydraulic systems after an engine explosion, a failure considered impossible to survive. The plane had no controls. The pilots managed to steer using nothing but the thrust of the remaining engines, something never attempted before. They didn't save everyone, but they saved over half the passengers in what experts still call one of the most extraordinary displays of flying skill in history. And that, my friend, is where we bring this flight to a close. I'm Apple, and this has been AppleKnows channel, guiding you through some of the most unbelievable yet absolutely real facts about planes and helicopters. From wings that bend like birds to helicopters that can glide without engines, from Concorde's time-bending speed to hidden crew bunkers above your seat, the sky is full of secrets that most people never notice. Aviation is the perfect mix of human brilliance, raw power, and razor-thin margins where one detail can make the difference between disaster and miracle. Every flight is a reminder that we are riding inside one of humanity's greatest creations, soaring through a world of thin air where technology and human skill keep us alive. If you've stayed with me until the end, you now see the sky differently. Every hum of an engine, every flash of a wing, every rotor above you holds a story. And that's the magic of aviation: it never stops amazing, and it never stops reminding us how fragile yet powerful flight really is. This has been AppleKnows. Until the next time we climb into the unknown, keep your eyes on the skies.